What would you do if you came face to face with one of nature's most fearsome predators and it was begging you for help? This is the true story of a park ranger who had to make an impossible choice in the depths of a remote forest, a choice that would either save a life or cost him his own. And what happened next? Well, it defied everything experts thought they knew about grizzly bears. But before we dive into this incredible tale, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to catch more heartwarming stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens in this story. Now, let's begin. His name was Marcus Webb, and he'd been a park ranger in the Northern Rockies for 17 years. 17 years of waking up before dawn, lacing up his weathered boots, and heading into the wilderness that most people only saw on postcards. Marcus wasn't your typical outdoorsman who talked about conquering nature. No, he respected it. He understood that out here, humans were just visitors in a world that belonged to something much older, much wilder. Marcus had seen it all. Mountain lions stalking elk through morning mist, wolves teaching their pups to hunt, eagles diving from impossible heights. But his true love? Bears, especially grizzlies. There was something about them that captivated him. Their raw power, yes, but also their intelligence. The way a mother grizzly would teach her cubs which berries were safe to eat. The way they remembered every fishing spot, every den, every trail through their territory. His colleagues often joked that Marcus was half bear himself. He moved through the forest with the same purposeful grace, reading tracks in the mud like others read books, understanding the language of broken branches and disturbed earth. He could tell you which bear had passed through an area just by looking at claw marks on the tree. That one's a young male, probably 3 years old, just left his mother's territory. This one's an old female, arthritic in her left paw, but still going strong. But despite all his experience, despite all those years in the wilderness, nothing could have prepared Marcus for what he was about to encounter on that crisp October morning. It was barely 6 a.m. when Marcus started his patrol. The first snow of the season had fallen overnight, dusting the pine trees with white and turning the forest into something from a fairy tale. His breath came out in silver clouds as he walked the northern trail, checking for any storm damage, making sure the trail markers were still visible. That's when he heard it. At first, it was so faint he thought it might be the wind moving through the valleys. But then it came again, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a roar, but not the confident, territorial roar of a healthy bear. This was different. This was pain. This was desperation. Marcus had heard wounded animals before, and the sound never got easier. He immediately changed direction, moving toward the source of the cry, his heart pounding. His mind raced through possibilities. A bear fight? A fall? Disease? As he got closer, pushing through thick undergrowth, stepping over fallen logs slick with frost, the roars became more frequent, more anguished. And then he saw it. In a small clearing, partially hidden by a cluster of aspens, was a sight that made him stop dead in his tracks. A massive grizzly bear, easily 600 pounds, with a coat that shimmered between gold and silver in the early morning light, was caught in a leg-hold trap. One of those brutal, illegal traps that were supposed to have been banned decades ago, but still showed up in remote areas, set by poachers who didn't care about the suffering they caused. The bear's right front paw was clamped in the steel jaws, and the area around the trap was torn up from the animal's desperate attempts to escape. Dirt, leaves, and small saplings were scattered everywhere. The bear had clearly been there for hours, maybe even all night, fighting against the trap until exhaustion had nearly overcome it. Marcus's first instinct was to radio for backup. This was way beyond a one-person operation. You didn't approach a trapped grizzly bear alone. It went against every protocol, every bit of training he'd ever received. A grizzly, wounded and terrified, was perhaps the most dangerous animal on the planet. Fight or flight kicked into overdrive when they felt threatened. And this bear had been fighting all night. He reached for his radio, but then he saw something that made him hesitate. Blood. There was blood on the trap, and it was fresh. The bear's paw was severely injured, and with every movement, with every attempt to pull free, the damage was getting worse. Marcus knew that if the bear kept fighting like this, if it was left in the trap much longer, it might lose the paw entirely. And a three-legged grizzly, in the wild, heading into winter, that was a death sentence. But backup was at least 2 hours away, maybe more, given the early hour and the snow-covered trails. 2 hours of this magnificent creature suffering, bleeding, potentially severing its own paw in panic. Marcus stood there, 50 feet from the bear, his mind at war with itself. The safe choice, the smart choice, was to wait for backup, set up a perimeter, keep the bear calm from a distance, and let the wildlife rescue team handle it with tranquilizer darts and proper equipment. But as he watched the bear struggle, watched it look down at its trapped paw with what could only be described as confusion and fear, something shifted in Marcus. He'd spent 17 years protecting these animals, 17 years advocating for them, fighting against the hunters and developers who saw them as threats or obstacles. And now, when one of them needed him most, what was he going to do? Hide behind protocol? The bear turned its massive head towards Marcus, and their eyes met. In that moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw something beyond animal instinct in those dark eyes. Not just fear, not just aggression, but a desperate, pleading intelligence that seemed to ask, "Can you help me?" Marcus did something that would either be the bravest or the most foolish thing he'd ever done. He started talking to the bear. "Hey there, big guy," he said softly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I know you're scared. I know you're hurting. But I'm gonna help you, okay? I need you to trust me." The bear watched him, panting heavily. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It just watched. Marcus took a step closer, then another. His hand was on the bear spray at his belt, but he didn't draw it. He kept talking, kept his voice low and calm, the way you might talk to a frightened dog. "Okay, buddy. This is gonna hurt at first, but then you'll be free. Please, please don't bite my head off." The bear made a sound, not a roar, not a growl, but something softer, almost like a whimper.
Marcus examined the trap. It was an old, spring-loaded mechanism, rusted but still devastatingly effective. He'd need to compress both sides of the spring simultaneously to release the jaws. It would take all his strength, and he'd need to be fast. The second the jaws opened, the bear would pull its paw free, and in that moment, overcome with pain and relief, it might lash out instinctively. "Here we go," Marcus said, positioning his hands on the trap springs. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. He pressed down with everything he had. The springs were stiff, resisting, but slowly, agonizingly, they began to compress. The steel jaws started to open. Marcus's arms shook with the effort, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold morning air. The bear felt the pressure releasing and immediately began to pull. "Wait," Marcus grunted. "Wait, not yet." But the bear couldn't wait. With a desperate heave, it yanked its paw free just as Marcus released the springs. The trap snapped shut with a metallic clang that echoed through the forest, missing Marcus's hands by inches. Marcus fell backward, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The bear stumbled away from the trap, holding its injured paw up, and for a moment, A long, terrible moment. Marcus thought about how vulnerable he was. Sitting on the ground, the bear now between him and the trail. No way to run, no way to defend himself. This was it. This was where he found out if he'd made the right choice or the last choice. The bear turned to face him. Marcus held his breath. And then something happened that he would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. Something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about wild animals and the barriers between species. The bear sat down. Just sat down like a giant dog, about 8 feet away from Marcus. It lifted its injured paw, looking at it, then looked at Marcus, then back at the paw, then at Marcus again. It was asking for help. Marcus slowly, carefully got to his feet. "Your paw," he said softly. "You want me to look at your paw?" The bear didn't move, didn't threaten, just held that paw up. Marcus had a first aid kit in his backpack. It was meant for humans, for hiking injuries, but he had gauze and antiseptic. Moving very slowly, telegraphing every motion, he took off his backpack and removed the kit. "I'm just going to clean it, okay? Just going to wrap it so it doesn't get infected." He approached the bear again, and the bear let him. This 600-pound apex predator, this animal that could kill him with a single swipe, sat patiently while Marcus knelt beside it and examined its injured paw. The damage was severe, deep lacerations where the trap's teeth had punctured the skin, swelling, possible broken bones, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. The trap had caught mostly the thick pad of the paw, and bears healed remarkably fast. Marcus cleaned the wound as gently as he could, though the bear flinched and growled softly at the sting of the antiseptic. I know. It burns like hell, but it'll help. Trust me." He wrapped the paw in gauze, using almost his entire supply to create a thick, protective bandage. It wouldn't last long in the wilderness, but it would protect the wound long enough for the healing to begin. "There," Marcus said, tying off the last of the bandage. "That should help." He sat back, and the bear lowered its paw, flexing it experimentally. It couldn't put much weight on it, but the bandage provided some stability, some relief. And then the bear did something that Marcus still struggles to describe to this day. It looked directly at him, held his gaze for a long moment, and then gently, carefully, reached out with its good paw and placed it on Marcus's shoulder. Not aggressively, not threatening. The touch was deliberate, controlled, almost gentle. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, Marcus felt something pass between them, an acknowledgement, a moment of pure understanding between two intelligent beings, a thank you. Then the bear withdrew its paw, turned, and began to walk away, limping on 3 legs but moving with determination toward the deeper forest. Marcus watched it go, tears streaming down his face, his entire body shaking from the release of adrenaline and emotion. He'd just had an encounter that most people wouldn't believe, that he barely believed, even having experienced it. Marcus sat in that clearing for a long time after the bear disappeared. Eventually, he radioed in to report the illegal trap, gave his coordinates, and headed back to the ranger station. He filed his report, carefully documenting everything, the trap, the rescue, even that final, impossible moment. His supervisor read the report with increasing concern. "Marcus," he said carefully, "you know you violated about 15 different protocols here, right? You approached a trapped grizzly alone. You physically released it. You claim it let you bandage its paw. I know how it sounds, but it happened. All of it." There was talk of suspension, of requiring psychological evaluation, of mandatory retraining. But Marcus didn't care. He knew what he'd experienced. He knew that for one perfect moment, the wall between human and wild had come down, and he'd connected with another intelligent being in the most profound way possible. The days passed. Fall turned toward winter. Marcus went back to his regular patrols, checking trails, monitoring wildlife, removing the occasional illegal trap. But he found himself returning to that clearing often, wondering about the bear, hoping it was okay. 3 weeks after the rescue, Marcus was hiking through a different part of the forest, checking on a report of a damaged shelter. The trail wound through dense pine forest, the ground now covered with several inches of snow. He rounded a bend and stopped. There, on the trail ahead, were tracks. Grizzly tracks, fresh ones, and one of the front paw prints showed a distinctive pattern, a slight drag on the right side, the mark of an injury that had healed but left its signature. Marcus's heart raced. He followed the tracks, not sure what he was hoping to find. The tracks led him off the trail, through the trees, to a rocky outcropping that overlooked a small frozen stream. And there, sunning itself on a flat rock, was the bear. It was definitely the same one, the golden-silver coat, the massive size, and yes, the slight favor of its right front paw. But the paw was clearly healing. The bear was putting weight on it, and though it still had a limp, it was nothing like the desperate, injured creature from that October morning. Marcus stood at the edge of the clearing, not wanting to intrude, content just to see that the bear was alive and recovering. But the bear had already noticed him. It raised its head, sniffed the air, and turned to look directly at Marcus. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the snowy clearing. Two beings who'd shared something remarkable, something that transcended the usual boundaries of their worlds. And then, the bear did something that made Marcus laugh out loud with joy and disbelief.
It lifted its injured paw, the one Marcus had bandaged, and held it up, as if to say, "Look, it's better. Thank you." Marcus raised his hand in return, a simple wave of acknowledgement. The bear watched him for another moment, then turned and ambled off into the forest, healthy and strong, ready to face the coming winter. Word of Marcus's encounter spread through the ranger network, and eventually to wildlife researchers and bear experts around the country. Most were skeptical. Bears didn't behave that way, they said. He must have misinterpreted the animal's actions. What seemed like intelligence and gratitude was probably just confusion and exhaustion. But some experts had different perspectives. Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife behaviorist who'd studied grizzlies for 20 years, reviewed Marcus's report and photos of the scene. Her conclusion? We've dramatically underestimated the cognitive abilities of grizzly bears. This encounter suggests a level of emotional intelligence and cross-species communication that challenges our fundamental assumptions about wildlife consciousness. Other stories began to emerge. A fisherman in Alaska who'd helped a bear with fishing line wrapped around its muzzle, only to have the same bear leave salmon on his boat dock weeks later. A biologist in Montana who'd treated bear cubs' infection, and later encountered the grown bear which approached calmly and allowed the biologist to pass safely through its territory. These stories had always been dismissed as coincidence or anthropomorphism. But Marcus's detailed account, his years of credibility as a ranger, and the physical evidence of the trap and tracks lent weight to what many indigenous peoples had always known. Bears remember. Bears understand. Bears, in their own way, can feel gratitude. The illegal trap led to an investigation that uncovered a poaching ring operating in the national forest.
3 men were arrested, and dozens of traps were removed from the wilderness. In that way, the bear's suffering led to protection for countless other animals. As for Marcus, he continued his work as a ranger, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He started an educational program teaching people about the intelligence and emotional complexity of bears, working to change the narrative from dangerous predator to fellow intelligent being deserving of respect and protection. He called the program Common Ground, reflecting his belief that humans and wildlife could find ways to coexist, to understand each other, if only we were willing to try. But this story isn't just about one ranger and one bear. It's about the relationship between humanity and the natural world. For so long, we've seen wildlife as other, as resources to be managed, threats to be controlled, or scenery to be admired from a distance. What if we've had it wrong this whole time? What if the animals we share this planet with are more like us than we ever imagined? What if they remember kindness? What if they understand help when it's offered? What if, in their own ways, they're capable of gratitude, of connection, of trust? Marcus's encounter challenges us to reconsider our place in nature. We're not separate from it, not above it, not masters of it. We're part of it. We're members of a vast, interconnected community of intelligent, feeling beings, and our actions ripple out in ways we're only beginning to understand. Every year, dozens of grizzly bears are killed because of conflicts with humans. Bears get into trash, threaten livestock, wander into campgrounds. And yes, very rarely, bears attack people. But what if many of those conflicts stem from our failure to understand bears, to respect their intelligence, to recognize them as neighbors rather than nuisances? Marcus's bear had every reason to attack him. It was wounded, terrified, in pain. But instead, it recognized help when it was offered. It chose trust over violence. It chose connection over conflict. What if we could make the same choice? Today, 5 years after that October morning, Marcus still patrols the forests of the northern Rockies. He's 52 now, a bit grayer, a bit more weathered by the elements, but he still loves his job, still cherishes every sunrise hike, still marvels at the wild beauty that surrounds him. And sometimes on his patrols, he sees tracks with a distinctive pattern. A large grizzly, right front paw with a slight drag. He never tries to find the bear anymore. He knows that what they shared was a moment, perfect and complete, not something to be repeated or exploited. But knowing the bear is out there, thriving in the wilderness, raising cubs of its own, passing on its genes and maybe even its memories to the next generation, that brings Marcus a sense of peace and purpose that nothing else can match. He keeps a photo on his desk at the ranger station. It's not of the bear. He never photographed it, wanting to preserve the sanctity of that moment. Instead, it's a picture of the clearing where the encounter happened. Taken on a golden autumn afternoon, the grass is tall, the aspens are wearing their fall colors, and in the center of the frame, barely visible, is the spot where the trap had been. But the trap is gone. The blood is gone. Nature has reclaimed the space, healing the scar as surely as the bear's paw healed. It's a reminder that nature is resilient, that wounds can heal, that even in our darkest moments, hope persists. Sometimes visitors to the ranger station ask about the photo. Why this particular clearing, they want to know. What makes it special? And Marcus smiles, that knowing smile of someone who's experienced something beyond words. And he says, "That's where I learned that the line between wild and civilized, between human and animal, is a lot blurrier than we think. That's where a bear taught me about trust." They usually laugh, thinking he's joking, but Marcus doesn't mind. Some truths don't need to be believed to be real. Some moments are perfect precisely because they're private, shared only between those who were there. The bear knows, Marcus knows, and that's enough. So, what can we learn from this incredible story? What does it mean for us, living our lives far from remote forests and grizzly bear encounters? First, it reminds us that compassion has no limits. Marcus could have waited for backup. He could have followed protocol. He could have made the safe choice. But when confronted with another being in pain, he chose empathy over caution, connection over separation. That's a choice we all face every day in countless small ways. Second, it shows us that intelligence and emotion aren't uniquely human traits. The bear that held up its paw for help, that sat patiently while a human bandaged its wound, that reached out in acknowledgement and gratitude, that bear demonstrated capacities we usually reserve for our own species. How many other animals possess similar depths that we've never recognized because we've never looked closely enough?
Third, it proves that walls can come down. The barrier between human and wild, the fear and misunderstanding that so often characterizes our relationship with large predators, dissolved in that clearing because two intelligent beings chose to see each other not as threats, but as individuals capable of offering and receiving help. And finally, it reminds us that we have a responsibility to protect these magnificent creatures and the wild places they call home. Every forest that falls to development, every habitat fragmented by roads, every bear killed in a conflict that might have been avoided, these are losses not just for the bears, but for all of us. Because in losing them, we lose the possibility of moments like the one Marcus experienced. We lose the chance to be surprised by the depth and complexity of the natural world. We lose mirrors that reflect back to us our own capacity for compassion, courage, and connection. Marcus Webb is still out there, walking the trails, protecting the forests, and occasionally crossing paths with a grizzly bear that once taught him the most important lesson of his life, that kindness can bridge any divide, that courage means acting even when you're afraid, and that sometimes the most dangerous-looking creatures are simply beings in need of help, just like us. The next time you see a story about a bear getting into trash or wandering too close to human settlements, I hope you'll think of Marcus and his bear. I hope you'll remember that behind that problem animal designation is an intelligent, emotional being trying to survive in a world that's increasingly hostile to its existence. And maybe, just maybe, you'll ask yourself, what would Marcus do? Would he see a problem to be eliminated or a neighbor to be understood? Would he choose fear or would he choose compassion? The answer, I think, is written in that clearing, in those tracks, in that moment when a man and a bear found common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances.
The wild is calling. It's asking us to listen, to understand, to connect. It's asking us to be brave enough to tear down the walls we've built between ourselves and nature, and to recognize that we're all part of the same beautiful, complicated, interconnected web of life. Marcus answered that call. The question is, will you? If this story moved you, if it changed the way you think about wildlife and our relationship with the natural world, please like this video and share it with others. Help spread the message that compassion has no boundaries, that intelligence comes in many forms, and that the wild creatures we share this planet with deserve our respect, our protection, and our wonder. Subscribe to this channel for more incredible stories of human-animal connections that challenge everything we think we know about the natural world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective. And if you can, consider supporting wildlife conservation organizations working to protect grizzly bears and their habitats. These magnificent animals need advocates now more than ever. You can find links to reputable organizations in the description below. Finally, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had an encounter with a wild animal that changed your perspective? Have you ever experienced that moment of connection across species? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who believe that compassion, understanding, and respect can bridge any divide. Remember, we're all walking through this world together, humans, bears, and everything in between. The question isn't whether we share this planet. We do. The question is, how we'll choose to share it. Will we choose fear and separation, or will we choose understanding and coexistence? Marcus made his choice in that clearing, face to face with one of nature's most powerful predators. Now it's our turn to choose. The wild is calling. What will your answer be?